Natasha Trethewey, Rutgers is humbled and grateful to have you to address the class of 2021 today. Thank you for joining us on this momentous occasion for our graduates. To say you have a way with words is indeed an understatement of great proportions, and I will now turn the mic over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Natasha Trethewey.
Greetings, President Holloway, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Greetings also to the members of the Rutgers University community, and especially the graduating class of 2021. I'm honored to speak to you on this momentous occasion. In times of uncertainty and upheaval, our rituals, our ceremonies, whether they be celebrations like this one or solemn occasions to mark darker times, serve to remind us of our history while also inspiring in us hope for the possibilities of the future. And because of all we've been through this last year, both collectively and individually, in this particular moment, we are called to hold those two things side by side, the solemn and the celebratory. When I think of these two things together, I'm reminded of a lovely poem by Liesl Mueller called When I Am Asked. It's a poem about how she became a poet in the aftermath of great personal loss. It begins, when I am asked how I began writing poems, I talk about the indifference of nature. The poem goes on to convey her profound grief over the death of her mother, who, like my own mother, died in the month of June. She describes a glorious warm day in which all the flowers are blooming, the sun is shining, and nothing in the landscape of the garden where she sits seems to acknowledge the depths of her loss, how isolated she feels in her individual mourning. It ends with this powerful declaration: I placed my grief in the mouth of language, the only thing that would grieve with me. She's speaking here about the language of poetry in particular, but also of our shared human language in general, what is written or spoken or otherwise conveyed between us, the way a poem is an individual voice speaking to us across the distances, asking that we listen not only with our intellect, but also our hearts. This past year, I've been thinking a lot about commemoration, how we remember, what we forget, and the indifference of nature to all of it. When I was invited to address you, to celebrate with you, we were already deep into living through the stunning manifestation of that indifference in the form of a pandemic that has left so many of us isolated, a virus that is still taking so many of our brothers and sisters here, at home, and around the world, infecting people of all races, young and old, rich and poor, sick or in good health. And when I sat down to write this address, everything outside my window was green and blossoming, and the death toll was approaching 600,000 in the US and spiking in places like Brazil and India. Nature is indeed indifferent, I thought, and indiscriminate. But the societal disparities that affect who is dying are not by nature. They are man-made. In tandem, throughout this past year, I've watched the streets of our cities and towns across the nation fill with Americans of all walks of life, all races and faiths standing and marching together in protest against police brutality and ongoing injustice, as if we were in the midst of the tumultuous times of my birth, the 1960s when my parents met and fell in love. And because I was born on Confederate Memorial Day in Mississippi, a holiday created to commemorate the lost cause of the Confederacy, the attempt to destroy the nation in order to maintain slavery, white supremacy, and the second-class citizenship of Black Americans, I watched with horror and deep sadness as the Confederate battle flag was carried through the halls of our nation's capital during a violent insurrection. the same flag that flew all around the state in commemoration as my mother made her way to the segregated maternity ward at the hospital. The flag raised in fervent opposition to advancements in the civil rights movement, the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts of 1964 and 65, and incorporated into the upper inner corner of the state flag of Mississippi. There, its message was a kind of synecdoche, a part standing in for the whole, that Mississippi would not be inclusive of all her citizens except in the ongoing narrative of white dominion over black subjects to whom it waved, "Know your place." The inclusion of the battle flag served as a visual reminder of white Mississippians' allegiance to its white supremacist, slave-holding heritage, indicative of the new ways the state would find to maintain the second-class status of Black Americans, among them unjust laws, unequal treatment, and myriad barriers to the ballot box. Writing in 1964, Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black asserted that no right is more precious in a free country than that of having a voice in the election of those who make the laws under which, as good citizens, we must live. Other rights, even the most basic, are illusory if the right to vote is undermined. The following year, the Voting Rights Act was signed into law. It was 1965, the year my parents married, my Black mother and my white father, though interracial marriage was still illegal in at least 17 states in the nation. In Mississippi, not only was it illegal for them to marry, it was also illegal to travel to another state to do so. For love, for the right to love whomever they chose, my parents committed an act of civil disobedience. Breaking an unjust law, they crossed the Ohio River into Cincinnati, as runaway slaves had done, for a measure of freedom in a state where they could marry legally. 2 years later, in 1967, the Supreme Court, in a gesture toward bestowing equal rights, struck down the laws against interracial marriage, ruling them unconstitutional. Because of that, with all the other advancements we've made since then as a nation, I did not expect to find us here, still unequal and more deeply divided, in the midst of turmoil, collective resistance, peaceful protest, and civil disobedience not seen in this country since the Civil Rights Movement. We are again at such an inflection point, this time at the convergence of two difficult moments in our shared history. A century ago, an event largely forgotten in our national memory, the pandemic of 1918 left 500,000 Americans dead. Worldwide, the virus killed, by a conservative estimate, 25 million. And just over a half century ago, the nation was erupting in protests against unjust, unequal treatment of Black Americans. That there are many people who don't know how we got here, who are surprised by the protesters' demands for justice, is evidence that we have long been a nation of forgetting, willed blindness, and amnesia. Amnesia around the events of our shared past is indeed part of why we find ourselves in this moment of upheaval, having a national reckoning amidst our national mourning. America wants to forget the past and the past in the present, poet Adrienne Rich wrote. At the intersection of these two national traumas, we are living the results of our national forgetting. The lessons we learned a century ago about stopping the spread of a deadly virus, about prevention and preparedness, all but forgotten or willfully ignored in initial responses to the epidemic. The lessons we should have learned about the effects of ongoing injustice and oppression, the powder keg of frustration and despair, ignored until the spark that, again, ignites a nation. The willed blindness and amnesia that kept so many people from seeing what was happening repeatedly to some citizens of our nation until a 9-minute video made the world see. The meaning of a symbol, unspoken language which is not indifferent, downplayed to a comfortable notion of nostalgia and fuzzy ideas about heritage without taking into account the full measure of what that heritage, then and now, is actually about. With you, the graduating class of 2021, who have been through so much, we have an opportunity to change the path from one of convenient forgetting and willed amnesia, which is a kind of indifference, to one of reckoning and remembering in order to contend with our past and shape our future. Among the most important things you've gathered at Rutgers, an institution committed to the pursuit of knowledge, groundbreaking research, and the commitment to service, is an awareness of the importance of evidence, of knowledge, both learned and empathic, the humane intelligence constitutive to meaningful, engaged service, and the necessity of eschewing the kind of studied indifference that renders the lives of others insignificant or invisible, the goals of all disciplines united in these pursuits. I think of the sentiment of Proverbs chapter 18, verse 15. It reminds us of the importance of the intersection of heart and mind. The heart of the person of understanding acquires wisdom, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. This makes sense to me as a poet, and that it points to a crucial aspect of our lives, the pursuit of knowledge rooted in the listening and the metaphorical representation of the seat of emotion, the muscle of empathy, the heart. At the intersection of heart and mind, we find poetry. The notion here of poetry connects to what I think of as the poetic quality of what you have spent these last few years deeply engaged in, the elegant equations you studied in mathematics, the sustained inquiry of your work in the sciences, your discoveries, the reckoning with the past and the impact on the present and our future in your history courses, in your language and literature classes, the figurative images and rhythms of syntax that can make the mind leap to a new apprehension of things, the clarity and power of your best prose, the world-changing potential of your ideas, designs, and life-saving and affirming care, the work of your hands, your gestures in art and theater courses, in medicine, the precision of the body in motion in your dance classes, your athletic pursuits, all of it a kind of poetry when you've performed at your best, as your best selves. It is a manifestation of our most humane intelligence, the intersection of heart and mind, the repudiation of indifference. Nature is indifferent. We don't have to be. In her essay, Resisting Amnesia, Adrienne Rich wrote that we can choose to become consciously historical. That is, a person who tries for memory and connectedness against amnesia and nostalgia. Referring to a speech by historian Lerone Bennett in which he spoke of the totalizing force of history, she quotes, "There is nothing you can do in history that will free you of the historical responsibility of being born at a certain time, in a certain place, with a certain skin color." Historical responsibility, she continues, has, after all, to do with action, where we place the weight of our existence on the line, cast our lot with others, move from an individual consciousness to a collective one. But we all need to begin with the individual consciousness. How did we come to be where we are and not elsewhere? Many of you began your studies here with a particular idea in mind of what your path would be. Some of you have stayed on it. Others have switched. Many of you have yet to even find it. Sometimes something happens, some national trauma or personal adversity that changes the course of our lives, as now, a pandemic. When I started college, I didn't know where I was headed, where my studies were taking me. And even when I finished, I hadn't yet identified the path I was on. But I can see now that what I gathered along the way has led me here. At the end of my freshman year, my mother was killed, and I was plunged into despair, isolated in my grief. To contend with it, I wrote my first poem, a simple act of articulation that was my earliest attempt to take the raw materials of my life and shape them into something that could be meaningful not only for myself, but for everyone else who had felt the depths of grief, who had ever loved someone deeply and lost them, as surely all of us will. I don't know the exact moment I realized my calling, that I would be a poet, but I do recall the lightning rod of Liesel Mueller's words. I placed my grief in the mouth of language, the only thing that would grieve with me. It echoed my realization that my greatest loss could be transformed in the language of poetry, and that language could give me solace as well as provide a sense of purpose, connecting me to the lives of others and giving meaning to the sudden tragic turn my life had taken. Unlike nature, language, what connects us to others in the act of communication, recording our past, articulating ideas about our present and future, is not indifferent. And I would argue, in the mindful, poetic quality of your work, whatever your calling, your vocation may be, you can chart a path that resists indifference and amnesia, one of empathy and connection in the service of justice and the common good. It requires a willingness to contend with the truth, with facts, with evidence, even if it is difficult and undermines the comfortable stories we've told ourselves about how we've gotten here. We can't have a history if we only want to recount our best moments, and we certainly can't have a hopeful future without remembering and reckoning with our difficult past. In this moment of shared national and international mourning, bombarded as we are every day with images of hate and suffering, devastation and destruction, we are reminded of what links us to every other human being on this planet: our mortality, our need for justice, shelter, companionship, sustenance, sanctuary, air to breathe. We must honor the dead by honoring the living, which means resisting indifference and amnesia, and recognizing that all lives have equal value, deserving of a world, a nation that treats them so, a nation that lives up to the as yet unrealized tenets of our creed: justice for all, due process, equal protection under the law. As challenging as much of what I have said sounds, the uncertain future ahead of us, in this moment we have so much cause for celebration. In spite of this most difficult year, you are here. Along with the knowledge you've acquired through your academic studies, you've triumphed over great odds and gathered a great deal of existential knowledge along the way. As Louis Pasteur wrote, "Chance favors the prepared mind." Take solace in that you have done much to prepare your mind for whatever comes. Be guided and buoyed by that, whatever your path, wherever this journey you've begun at Rutgers takes you. Be historically conscious, mindful of how you got to be here and not somewhere else. Often, when I'm worn down by the daily news, I remember that not only can language grieve with us, but that it can celebrate with us too. It's then that I turn to a poem by Lucille Clifton that I think speaks to all of us surviving in our collective moment. It's called, "Won't You Celebrate With Me?" Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Clifton's poem of celebration speaks to our collective experience, each of our unique selves, the whole human community dealing with the difficulties of our world. It is a triumph of the enduring human spirit to mark such an occasion. I know that in my life, I have faced tragedy, life-threatening events such as the one we now face, and the possibility of something that could have destroyed me. We all have. Class of 2021, won't you celebrate with me? Congratulations to you all.